The SAT, a test we've learned to take as a fact of life if we want to go to college. But as standardized college admission tests like the SAT and ACT face increased scrutiny and even lawsuits over how fair they are, it's worth asking, who decided the SAT was the best way to test college applicants in the first place? The answer has way more to do with racism than fancy academic theories. Carl Brigham, an American psychologist, designed the first iteration of the SAT in the 1920s.
Before we go into how that happened, it's important to know this.
Brigham was a known eugenicist, which means he believed that you could improve the human race through controlled breeding of desirable characteristics. Brigham used those same principles of eugenics and applied them to the military. In the 1920s, Brigham, along with other eugenicists, designed the Army Alpha Test, a multiple-choice exam with the goal of admitting only the smartest people into the U.S. military.
Supposedly showed that some races were more intelligent than others.
And Brigham believed American intelligence was declining as racial integration became, quote, more and more extensive, end quote. So he wanted to introduce this idea of weeding out dumb people to American universities.
Carl Brigham made a kind of version of it to be used as a college admissions test. That test was the SAT.
So how did Brigham convince a bunch of universities to make a test that was rooted in eugenics the de facto test for admission? That's where James Conant, then president of Harvard, comes in. As the newly appointed president in 1933, he was committed to diversifying the student body.
Conant wanted to find just a few people a year to bring to Harvard on full scholarship. So he called in one of his assistants and said, I need you to find me a test.
In his quest to find the perfect test, Conant's assistant met Carl Brigham. They hit it off and presented Brigham's test to Conant.
Conant really liked the test.
So he adopted it. Conant liked the test so much, he started convincing other colleges to use it. A few years later, it became the admissions test for all students at Harvard. And back then, anything Harvard did, other schools did. So the test was quickly adopted across the nation.
And the SAT became, the test for college admissions.
Now, fast forward to today.
Colleges and universities across the country right now dropping the test requirement.
The lawsuit filed today wants the UC system to drop those tests from its admissions process.
The SAT and ACT are seeing a reckoning of sorts, and here's why.
Black and Latino students on average do significantly worse than white and Asian students.
In fact, one analysis of 1.7 million scores from 2015 found that on average, Black and Latinx test takers scored lower than white and Asian students on the math section. There's reason to believe income plays a factor too. Data from the College Board shows that students from families who make more than $20,000 a year averaged a higher score than families who make less than $20,000 a year.
And it's obviously not because minorities aren't as smart as white people. So what is it?
Kawika Smith is a high school senior and one of the plaintiffs in the University of California lawsuit we mentioned earlier. He thinks he knows why someone like him would score lower.
Competitive score, it's gonna cost. My friends who, like I said, who lives in Westwood, they paid $5,000 during the summer, and they did this every year throughout high school. That's something that is a huge ask for someone who's low income and coming from an impoverished area.
Smith is referring to the thousands of dollars parents drop on test prep for their kids.
These classes can run up to $2,600 for 10 hours of private instruction. In one affluent area of New York, up to 75% of students could be getting test prep, according to MarketWatch.
And it's access to these test prep courses that is giving wealthier, usually white, students a leg up.
Taking the PSAT was very challenging. I went in and was hungry. Literally, I couldn't afford food that day. My mom spent her last getting gas just to get me to school.
SATs as a primary admissions device are kind of the natural enemy of diversity.
So what does the SAT think? Priscilla Rodriguez is the VP of College Readiness Assessments at College Board, the nonprofit that administers the test. We asked her, is the SAT the enemy of diversity?
I couldn't disagree more. The SAT is a door opener.
The College Board maintains that the SAT is not discriminatory and echoes the National Council on Measurement in Education when it says, quote, criticizing test results for reflecting these inequities is like blaming a thermometer for global warming. Rodriguez accepts that the SAT she took decades ago wasn't equitable, but insists the SAT of today is.
We redesigned the SAT completely back in 2016. No more SAT vocabulary words, tricky math problems. We wanted it to measure what students learn in high school, what they need to learn in college. We test the SAT and every single question in it very, very carefully to ensure that there's no bias, that there's not a differential in performance just based on what kind of student group you might be in. Every question that ends up on an SAT that a student takes 2 years to develop.
So why the stark difference in performance among different groups of people?
It's, we think, an unfortunate shining of a light on inequalities that exist in our societies. Inequalities in access to really high quality education from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. That is what the research shows drives the differences in performance.
Which is why in 2014, the College Board made a big about face. After years of arguing that test prep does not and cannot improve test scores, they did this.
Beginning today, the College Board will partner with Khan Academy to provide free test preparation for the world.
The reason we did it was because we did see that inequity in access to practice and preparation. We have data that shows that if a student practices 6 or 8 hours on Khan Academy total, they see on average 90-point score improvement.
Those 90 points sound like a lot, but they pale in comparison to the 300-point improvement some private tutoring services promise. I pointed Rodriguez to a study of 28 public and private institutions that have dropped the SAT requirement. The study, comprised of 956,000 student records, found that these schools enroll and graduate a higher proportion of low-income and first-generation students.
What a lot of schools are doing, whether they're requiring the exams or not, is they're providing a lot of other support, like kind of in conjunction with these decisions they're making. And so it's hard to unpack causation, but we celebrate improvement for students no matter what.
As of 2019, at least 1,000 universities and colleges in the US have stopped requiring the SAT and ACT, and more are being pressured to do so, including the UC system. In response to the lawsuit it's facing, the University of California system said it was, quote, disappointed the plaintiffs have filed a lawsuit when they had, quote, already devoted substantial resources to studying this complex issue. In 2019, the UCs created a special task force to study the effectiveness of the ACT and the SAT as testing methods.
They released their findings in February of 2020. Their recommendation? Keep requiring the SAT and ACT. The task force also said it did not find that the UC's use of test scores played a major role in worsening the effects of disparities already present among applicants.
For the record, we reached out to the ACT for this piece, but did not hear back.
Regardless of what happens with the SAT, now you at least know where it came from. Now we just gotta figure out where it's going. But what do you think? Should colleges keep requiring the SAT and the ACT? Let us know in the comments.